Can you tell us your name, please?
My name is Peter Feigl,
Yes.
F-E-I-G-L.
And what was your name at birth?
At birth, my name was Klaus Peter Feigl.
Can you spell that for us?
That's K-L-A-U-S, Peter, and last name Feigl, F as in Frank, E-I-G-L.
What was the date of your birth?
I was born on the 1st of March, 1929, in Berlin, Germany.
And how old are you now?
At the present time, I'm 68.
What was the name of your father?
My father's name was Ernst, E-R-N-S-T, Feigl.
And your mother?
My mother's name was Agnes, A-G-N-E-S, Feigl, and her maiden name was Bornstein, B-O-R-N-S-T-E-I-N.
Did you have any brothers or sisters?
No, I was an only child.
How was that for you, being an only child?
Well, I couldn't compare it with a family where I would have had siblings, since I was the only one, but in subsequent years, especially during the war experience, I considered it somewhat of an advantage, because I only had to think of number one, of myself. And in many a situation, it probably saved my life. My father was assigned to the Vienna office of the company. Now, throughout this period, first of all, my father, I heard discussion about Hitler and some of the problems for the Jews. My father's position basically was, number one, it's of no concern to him because, A, he is an Austrian living in Germany, and therefore the persecution of the Jews that Hitler was planning or had started didn't apply to him because he was a foreigner. Secondly, my father was also convinced that since he had served in the Austrian Imperial Navy during the First World War and was decorated, that certainly it wouldn't apply to him. Austria was an ally of Germany at the time. And lastly, he felt that the whole Nazi policy was really geared towards the Polish Jews who failed or refused to integrate into German society and who stood out like a sore thumb. In the beginning of '36, we moved to Austria when my father was assigned there. And one of the first things that my father did at that point was that he had me baptized as a Catholic. He felt that this could be useful for me at some time in the future. And I went to catechism school and became a good Catholic. As I said, my parents didn't practice any religion. And we were in Austria on the day of the Anschluss, when Germany annexed Austria, and this occurred in March, I think it was the 12th or the 13th of March, 1938. And at this point, my father realized for the first time that his Austrian citizenship was no longer a protection for him and for his family. I have a vague recollection that once in Berlin and maybe once or twice in Vienna, in school, someone may have called me a Jew, something which really didn't register with me because I didn't understand why should I be called a Jew. I was a Catholic, certainly in Austria I was, and in Berlin it wouldn't have made any sense to me because I wasn't aware of my Jewishness. As a matter of fact, I had run away from home on the 13th of March, I think it was, that Hitler appeared in Vienna on the balcony of the city hall. And I left home in the morning, went down to the public square in front of the City Hall, where tens of thousands of people were assembled, shouting at the top of their lungs, ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer, one people, one Reich, and one leader, one Führer. And I was caught in the spirit of this. I was 9 years old. I saw a lot of Hitler youth around me, wearing uniforms, smart uniforms, and little daggers on their side, and I wished I could join them. And when, after many hours, and seeing Hitler on the balcony appearing up there and making a speech, I went home. My mother was very upset. She didn't know where I had been. She demanded to know, where have you been? And I said, I saw our Führer. Whereupon my mother promptly slapped me left and right, and then I realized that I wasn't supposed to have said that. And I remember that vividly, and she said to me, don't you ever call that SOB our Führer. He is not. He is our enemy. So that was my first realization that Nazism was not for me or for our family. So we arrived in Belgium in middle or late March of 1938. I remember that there was quite a bit of elation in the family because Belgium was a neutral country. The rumors of impending war were already circulating. My parents felt relieved that in a neutral country they would have nothing to worry about, that even if war should break out, we were safe. And when war actually started in 1939, in September of 1939, indeed Belgium remained neutral and was not affected by that war. So things went on more or less normally, in quotation marks, normally, until the 10th of May 1940, when Germany invaded Belgium, Holland, and several other countries, and suddenly Belgium found itself engulfed in the war as well. On that morning, my father, as the manager of the company's office, which was located in Antwerp, headed for the railway station, as he did every business day. And I know there was an argument again between my mother and my father. She didn't want him to go. My father insisted on going. He said he had a responsibility towards the other employees and had to pay out whatever wages are due them. And on the way to the railroad station, at the railroad station, he was stopped by Belgian police who checked everyone's identity papers. And they saw that my father had a German passport, and he was promptly arrested by the Belgian police as a, quote, suspected or actual German paratrooper. My mother then reached the decision that she didn't want to stay in Brussels, and she took her mother and my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, and we began the long trek from Brussels towards Paris, together with hundreds of thousands of other refugees, on the trek through along the coast of Belgium into France and ultimately to Paris. We arrived in Paris, and I think within 2 or 3 hours of our arrival there was an air raid. I was sleeping in one of these attic rooms in the apartment building where my aunt lived, and had one of these windows that opens up onto the roof itself, and there was this air raid siren just outside that window, and I slept right through it. My mother woke me up, shook me, and literally carried me downstairs. I was exhausted. I didn't know what was going on. I was sleeping right through it. And my mother decided that she wouldn't spend another hour here. She wanted to head south, further south. And so she took her mother and me and took a train, and we managed to get to Bordeaux in the south of France.
What were your feelings at this time?
I had no feelings. I was a kid. I was wondering what happened to my father. But basically, I was in the company of my mother, who was looking after me, and my grandmother. And this is 1940. I'm 11 years old. During the strafing raids on the highway, I saw people die next to me. I saw cattle felled by machine gun fire. The thought of death is something that doesn't penetrate an 11-year-old's mind. This is something that happens to other people, but not to you. The little money that she had, she bought a railway ticket for herself, for her mother, and for me, and we took the train at our expense and went to Oloron-Sainte-Marie. And when we arrived over there, the train was surrounded at the station by armed French gendarmes with submachine guns, and they took us off the train, loaded us onto military trucks, and the next thing we knew, we were in a French internment camp called the Camp de Gurs, that's G-U-R-S, which was an infamous camp that the French originally built for and was built by Spanish communists who had fled from the Spanish Civil War in 1937-38. And so we were interned in this camp together with thousands of other refugees in similar condition as ours. The conditions were pretty bad. The food was almost non-existent. By late June, France collapsed, signed an armistice with Germany, and at the end of June or early July, my mother learned as barracks chief that there would be a German Wehrmacht, a German army inspection team, coming the next day to inspect the camp. And at this point, my mother, partly out of desperation, decided that since her passport did not bear a J, she would see if she couldn't bluff her way out of this camp. The next morning, she managed to maneuver herself right to the entrance of the camp. She had me by the hand, and when the German army delegation appeared, she pushed herself forward and brandishing her passport, her German passport, yelled, "Heil Hitler, Herr Oberst, Heil Hitler, Colonel, I am a German national and I demand to be released instantly from this filthy French camp where we have been detained, my mother and my child, and I want to get out right away." And he was taken aback, looked at her passport, turned to the French camp commander, and said to him in broken French, "You let Madame out immediately, and you call a taxi, and you pay for the taxi to take Madame and her mother and her child wherever they want to go." And within a half hour or 40 minutes, we were in a cab, and the cab driver said, "Where to?" And my mother said, "North," because she knew that we couldn't go into Spain. The Spaniards were guarding the frontier and keeping people from coming across. And after several hours on the road, we arrived in a town outside of a town called Auch, A-U-C-H, in the department of Gers, G-E-R-S. And there, refugees came across the railroad tracks from the north towards us. And they waved the cab driver off and said, "Don't go any further north. There are German troops on the other side of town." So my mother decided to get out, and she saw that there was a large red brick building off to the left side of the railroad crossing. And she went there, knocked on the door, and it was a Catholic convent. And she explained her situation to the nuns, and although I don't recall for sure, she must have mentioned that her son was Catholic, and the nuns took us in, and so we found shelter there, my grandmother, my mother and I. We still really at this point didn't know for sure where he was. We made inquiries through the International Red Cross in Geneva, and I think it must have been sometime in September of 1940, September or October 1940, before we first found out that my father had also been interned in a French detention camp. I don't recall the name of the first camp where he was in. Subsequently, he was transferred to another camp called the Camp de Saint-Cyprien, which was a camp that was hastily erected by the French right on the beach on the Mediterranean. And during that winter, I think the winter of 1940-41, there were very severe storms, very cold and rainy weather, and extremely high tides which flooded the camp on several occasions. Many of the people got very ill. Typhus was raging in the camp, and many people died. And I believe that it was in the early part of 1941, maybe by springtime of 41, that my mother was able to arrange for my father to get a so-called convalescent leave. My father was extremely ill by then, had lost probably about 30 or 40 pounds. And apparently the camp authorities felt that he didn't have much longer to go. He was about 52, 53 years of age at that point, about 16 years older than my mother. And they thought, well, he might as well die outside the camp, and it'll save us the expense of burying him. So he came to Osh and joined us there. And I recall that this so-called convalescence leave had to be renewed every 30 days, and he was able to stay with us during that time. In 1941, in the summer of 41, again through the Quakers, my mother was able to send me off to a summer camp in Talois on the Annecy Lake near the Swiss border in France. And I think that was a 2-week summer camp. And she made similar arrangements for me in the summer of 1942, where she arranged for me to be sent to a children's colony called the Colonie d'Enfants at the Château de Montéléon, which was in a town called Condom, C-O-N-D-O-M, which was about 25, 30 miles away from Osh, where we were. And this summer camp was also in part administered by some nuns. There were some Catholic nuns there that were running it too. Now, before being sent to this second summer camp in July of 42, must have been the latter part of July of 42, I had heard whispering at home. We lived in a one-room apartment at that point. That one room was living room, bedroom, kitchen, everything in one. And the whispering had to do with roundups of Jews in Paris. The word Veldiv was mentioned, the Velodrome d'Hiver, where the first roundups occurred in 1941 already. Apparently, they became more intensive in 1942. And of course, my parents were trying to shelter me from this, but I heard rumors. I heard rumors of people being sent eastward, resettlement eastward. It was sometime in August that my father came to visit me out there. And he had a nice, shiny new bicycle. And despite his physical condition, which had improved somewhat since my mother had taken care of him, he did manage to make this long bicycle trek in the summer, and attached to the luggage carrier on the back of the bicycle was a square cookie tin, and he pulled out of the tin a small sack which made up a handkerchief which I recognized, that my mother had sewn together to make a bag out of it. And I wanted to look inside, and he said, "No, don't look inside. Just take this thing and protect it and keep it with you." And I still didn't understand what he was doing, what was going on. All I know is that when, after spending a couple of hours with me, he climbed back on his bicycle and headed away from the children's home, from the colony. And I watched him disappear over the crest of a hill. I suddenly was overcome with emotion and felt that I'll never see him again. And indeed, a few days later, the director of this camp, a Mrs. Cavaillon, called me into her office and first told me that my parents had been arrested in Osh. The bag contained, as I found out shortly after he had left, curiosity. I opened it up, and there was a small amount of French money. There was my father's gold pocket watch with a black fob and a Buddha attached to it, a golden Buddha. There was a small miniature spark plug that he kept as a good luck charm, as well as a small silver horseshoe that was on his keychain always, on his car keychain. And it also contained a large ring that my mother always wore, a signet type ring, and a bracelet of my mother's. And yes, when I opened that bag and saw what was in it, then I also realized that they must be expecting something unpleasant, and that they were worried, A, of losing these family treasures, and B, that they thought that they might help me at some point survive, either by paying my way out or whatever. So I think what identified my parents as Jews were the Vichy government, the so-called Free France legislature, early on, after the armistice, passed laws very similar to those of the Nazis in Germany, which defined the Jew as anyone whose mother was Jewish and anyone whose mother, grandmother, or great-grandmother was Jewish. So as far as they were concerned, it was the direct lineage through the mother that defined who was a full Jew, a half Jew, or a quarter Jew.
Well, what knowledge do you have that they had any official papers at all that identified them as Jews?
I don't know this as a matter of fact. I believe that on just about all identity papers that were issued in France, certainly also in Germany, religion is always was always a form that you had to fill out under religion, and I think that on that basis, I was a Jew on the basis of my mother's religion. I kept diaries. My first diary I started when I learned that my parents had been arrested, so that was in late August of 1942. I was still confident and hopeful of seeing them again. The diary was dedicated to them, and I wanted them to know everything that I did while we were separated. A few days after my parents were arrested, The director of that children's colony called me again to her office and told me that she had received a phone call from the French police, from the gendarmerie in Condom, in the town, alerting her to the fact that they had received orders to come and arrest me. And they gave her about an hour and a half's warning, and she told me that they would have to make me sick enough so that when the gendarmes came to pick me up, they would be able to certify that I was very ill and that I was in no condition to be transported. So they proceeded to induce a high fever in me. When the police came, there were two gendarmes. I remember them coming into the room, looking me over, taking my temperature, and saying, well, the kid is too sick, we can't move him. Now, this scenario was repeated 2 more times. In other words, they came a grand total of 3 times they came to pick me up, and every time they had to find that I was running a high fever and they couldn't move me. My mother and father, before I arrived in Marseille, a couple of weeks before, a postcard came from them informing the director of the home and me that my parents were in a camp called the Camp du Vernet, V-E-R-N-E-T, and that they expected to be relocated eastward. There was another notice that came a few days later advising that they had been transferred to Drancy, D-R-A-N-C-Y, which is a small suburb of Paris. Years later, I found out that Drancy was a collection point from which then the cattle trains were loaded with people and shipped off to Auschwitz. But at that time, I didn't know that yet. Now, during this period, the director of this children's colony, Mrs. Cavaillon, made contact with the Quakers and tried to arrange for me to go on a children's transport that was being organized by the Quakers. And this transport was scheduled to sail for the United States sometime in November of 1942. Many years later, I found a letter that she had written to the Quakers arguing with them and pleading with them to take me, because I found this only last year when I went to Paris. I found a file on me in Paris at the OSE, which is a organization that was looking after children at that time. And the Quakers had sent a form to Mrs. Cavaillon, which I filled out in my own handwriting. And where it said religion, I put down Catholic. And the Quakers wrote back to her and said, we cannot help a Christian child. There are too many needy Jewish children, and we must look after them, and the spaces are being saved for them. So she wrote a long, multi-page letter to them, explaining to them that I had been baptized by my parents, that I consider myself a Catholic, but the fact of the matter is that under French law, then existing French law and German law, I was Jewish, and that they ought to reconsider that the police had already come 3 times to pick me up, and that this was a case of an emergency case. And finally they relented and decided to take me. So Mrs. Cavaillon took me down, accompanied me to Marseille sometime in, must have been mid to late October of 1942. I learned then that the ship was scheduled to sail on the 14th of November, 1942. Unfortunately, on the 11th or the 12th of November, 42, the Allies landed in North Africa. This was the pretext that the Germans then used to occupy the so-called free zone of France, the unoccupied zone of France. And the Germans, of course, Marseille was France's biggest port on the Mediterranean. They immediately occupied the port, and the ship was stopped from sailing, and we were put into another children's colony in a place called Les Caillols, Caillols, which is a suburb of Marseille. I think this was a hastily arranged children's colony. There were problems with food. I very foolishly noticed that across the street from the children's home where I was, a German detachment of Waffen-SS had occupied a farm and used it to park their armored vehicles and tanks. And I saw that the German soldiers were eating very, very well. So since I spoke German fluently, I went over there and began to talk to them, and they gave me chocolate, they gave me food, and I was very happy until someone started to inquire and say, what am I, a good German boy, doing here in the south of France? And I don't know whether this was inspired from my mother's bluff in the Camp de Gurs when she got out. I just turned to this German officer and I said, oh, psh, don't mention this, but my father is in the Gestapo, the German secret police. And we're here in France. I've been here since before the war. I speak French fluently. I listen in on the chatter of my French school classmates, and I report it to my father, and it's been very, very useful in getting information on what the French are thinking and doing. I was, after I had talked to these German Waffen-SS and gotten food from them, when the director of that home found out about it, he was livid and immediately shipped me off to another place. I begged him to please let me remain because I had already made friends there, and besides I was getting good food. I just didn't realize what I was doing, okay? 1942, 13, what the heck, I was having a good time. And I was eating better than the other kids were. So by late December 31st, I was notified that I would be shipped off to another location. And I was put on a train, and on New Year's Eve they explained to me that there would be fewer patrols and police out checking people's travelers' papers, identity papers. And I was told to get off at a place called Le Chambon-sur-Lignon. That's spelled L-E, in other words, C-H-A-M-B-O-N, Sur, S-U-R, and Lignon, L-I-G-N-O-N. And I arrived there at about 4 o'clock in the morning, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. It was a bitter cold night. And I was met there by a young man named Daniel Trocme, T-R-O-C-M-E, who then took me, and we had a very, very long walk through the night, and ultimately I wound up in a stone farmhouse called Les Grillons, G-R-I-L-L-O-N-S, the crickets, French word for crickets. And there I found myself together with about 22 or 24 other kids, ranging in age from about 6, 7, up to about 17 or 18, boys and girls. And Daniel Trocme was our, call it then father. He was our supervisor and the man who ran that particular home. Later on, I found out that he was the cousin of the pastor of Le Chambon, whose name was André Trocmé. At first, I didn't know where I was, what it was. I discovered later, especially after the war, many years after the war, that Le Chambon was a most unique village in France. It is located at about 3,000 feet elevation in the Massif Central, in the central mountain chain in France. Sort of isolated on a desolate plateau, very cold in the winter, windswept plateau. Agriculture was pretty rudimentary, but what made this village unusual was that in a country that is 90% or 95% Catholic, this village was about 90% Protestant. And the villagers, under the leadership of their pastor, André Trocmé, were inspired to live the Bible. These were very simple farmers, and they considered that the Jews were the chosen people of the Bible. They knew that they were hiding Jews. They also believed in helping, because the Bible says to them, help thy neighbor. If someone is sick, go and visit them at their sick bed. If someone is hungry, feed them. If someone needs shelter, give them shelter. And these people literally did so at great risk to themselves and their entire families, because what they were doing was illegal. If caught, they risked not only arrest for themselves, but for the members of their family, their children, expropriation of their property, and so on. So it was a great risk, personal risk, that these people did this. During that period, they then also provided us with false identification cards. They took identity pictures of us, and in due time I was given a French identity card with the name of Pierre Fesson, F-E-S-S-O-N. I kept my same birth date, but I was told that my place of birth was Auch, Gers, where I last lived with my parents. And since I spoke French fluently, without an accent, they then decided sometime in September of 1942 to send me to a boarding school in Figeac, F-I-G-E-A-C, in the department of Lot, L-O-T. And I was sent there with about 4 or 5 other kids in the similar situation. Some came from the same house where I was, same Les Grillons. Others came from other homes where other children were being sheltered. And so we found ourselves in Figeac at the beginning of the 1943-44 school year. And clearly we felt that we were fairly safe there now. We lived as Frenchmen, so to speak. And this went on until about the latter part of April 1944. At that point, the Germans occupied the town again and ordered all males between the ages of 16 and 55 to report to City Hall. Although I was only 15 and a half at the time, I knew well enough at that point not to go and be exposed. I went and hid in the local church, which was adjacent to the school where I was, and stayed there for about 24 hours. I knew my way in and out of that church, including how to get up into the church steeple, since I had also served Mass in that church. I was then contacted a few days later and was told to prepare to leave, that it was no longer safe for me to be there, and I was given a railway ticket, and I was told to take a train and to get off at a station called Viry, V-I-R-Y, near the Swiss border, and that I would be approached then by what they call a passeur. These are people who help people pass across the border. Most of them worked for pay. They got paid for doing this. Maybe some of them did it out of idealism. My real birth certificate, on which, by the way, on the back of it, they had stamped my baptism certificate, was stamped on it, was sewn into my clothing. I got off the train in Viry. We just had a small backpack with essentially a change of clothing. And I was approached by the passeur, who told me to follow him. We walked through open fields for about 2 miles or so. He explained to me that he was going to drop me off in a forest, that I was to lie on the ground and to keep quiet, not move, wait until I hear dogs barking. That would be the time of the changing of the guard. I think it was around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 1 p.m. And when I heard the changing of the guard, I was to jump up, and I would see straight in front of me a row of barbed wire fences. I was to go over those. Once I was on the other side, I would be in something called no man's land. I was to cross that no man's land, which was about 60 to 100 yards in width, and there would be a second row of barbed wires. That would be the Swiss wires. I was to go over those wires, and once I was on the other side in Switzerland, then I could stop running, and I should be safe there. He said goodbye to me, and I remember it was a foggy, drizzly day. I was lying on the wet ground, waited, heard the dogs barking, and did as he had told me. I jumped up, started to run across over the first row of barbed wires. When I dropped into the no man's land and was about 20, 30 yards into it, suddenly I heard someone yell, "We're going the wrong way, we're going the wrong way." It was a girl. There are Germans on the other side. And I looked, and I saw the silhouette of a soldier wearing a field green-gray uniform, same color as the German army uniforms. But I immediately realized that the silhouette of the helmet was not like a German helmet. It was quite different. And I also saw the man carry a rifle in a manner that I had never seen a German carrying it. He carried it like a baby in his crossed arms. So I decided to keep going and got to the second row of barbed wires. At this point, on the French side, they started shooting at us, at the people who were inside the no man's land. I kept running, got over the fence, and I think I was one of the first, if not the first one, to get across the fence when the soldier on that side, a Swiss soldier as it turned out then, motioned to me and told me, "Get behind the building." And I did as he ordered. I understand that some people were killed during the crossing here. About a dozen or so of us managed to get across. We waited behind the building. A Swiss army truck then came and took us into Geneva, or in the suburb of Geneva. It was like being in paradise. On the way, I saw things that none of us had seen for months or even years. on the displays outside the fruit stores, grocery stores, and so forth. We saw bananas and oranges and grapefruit. And anyhow, we wound up in a Swiss Red Cross camp. I was given to understand that Switzerland could only take so many people, that it was overrun by refugees at the time. We're now in May of 1944, just 2-3 weeks before the Normandy landings. And fortunately, I remember the name of a company and of an individual who was a business associate of my father's. It was a company, Grossenbacher and Company in Bern. And the man was a Mr. Gersonde. And so I gave that name to the representative of the Red Cross, the Swiss Red Cross, Swiss or International Red Cross. And they apparently got in touch with them. And Mr. and Mrs. Gersonde decided that they would take me into their home. And I'm sure that this was instrumental in the Swiss authorities giving me a so-called refugee identity card and allowing me to remain in Switzerland at that time. So after about 4 or 5 weeks in the camp, in the Red Cross camp, I was then sent to the Gersonde family in Bern. And there they arranged for me to go to public school. My whole education had been pretty hectic through all this period. I got in one full year of normal schooling until the school, after a year, was glad to get rid of me. And so was the Gersonde family. I obviously, during these years in hiding, this had affected me emotionally. I couldn't adjust. I clearly had experiences that went far beyond anything that my schoolmates certainly in Switzerland had, where they had led a sheltered, peaceful life through all these years. And the teachers considered that I was too difficult to handle. So,
in what way?
Breaking rules, not paying attention, distracting the others, undisciplined. I think basically I felt then, as I later felt in the United States when I arrived here in 1946, that I had been suppressed for 2 or 3 years. And now this was freedom. I could breathe. I had to catch up with a lot of experiences that others had that I didn't have. So I wasn't exactly the easiest person at that time. In fact, I was expelled from 2 other places in Switzerland subsequently too. My uncle and aunt and grandmother in New York found me, and they immediately applied for me to get a visa to come to the United States, an immigration visa. I think the fact that I had been scheduled on this Quaker ship, there must already have been some paperwork in the United States for applications for immigration to the U.S. This, I think, expedited matters. Finally, in 1946, May or June, I was given a visa to come to the U.S., and I came over on a Victory ship, a Marine Flasher, and arrived in New York Harbor in July of 1946. The only thing that I knew was the Camp du Vernet, and then the notice that they went to Drancy and were shipped eastward. I didn't really find out that they had been sent to Auschwitz until I think it was well into late 46 or middle of 47 was the first time that I found out that they apparently had been sent to Auschwitz. Then subsequently, the German government established an arbitrary certificate of death for them and said that they died on the 8th of May 1945, yes, 45, which was really the last day of the war. But this was arbitrary. And it wasn't until 1991 here in Palm City that I discovered through another survivor who showed me a book put together by the Klarsfelds, which had a list of all the Jews who were arrested in France, and he showed the book to me, and I found in those lists that my parents were listed there. It told me the convoy on which they were shipped out of Drancy. It was convoy number 28 on August the 29th, I believe it was, and that they arrived in Auschwitz on September the 2nd and were gassed on arrival. Shortly after I turned 18, I announced that I was going to join the Air Force to become a pilot. I no longer needed anyone's signature. My aunt and my uncle tried to talk me out of this. That just reinforced my my contrariness. They don't like it, must be good. So I went into the Air Force, enlisted, and served 3 years in the U.S. Air Force. Unfortunately, they didn't teach me how to fly. The excuse was that since I wasn't a citizen yet, I couldn't become a pilot. So then I said, well, send me to flight mechanic school, or no. They said I was a lucky so-and-so. I didn't have to go to school. They're going to put me into intelligence because I speak French and German fluently. So I wound up in air technical intelligence and at Wright Field. And really, I think my education, I really owe it to the Air Force, because those 3 years in the Air Force exposed me to a myriad of technical documents covering every imaginable subject. These were all mostly captured German Air Force documents. And they covered such fields as aerodynamics, hydraulics, meteorology, etc. And before translating any of these documents, I had to familiarize myself with the vocabulary. And I was able to go to a technical library and to spend a couple of days reading up on these subjects. And I think that gave me a fairly good, solid technical base for my subsequent career. I think the message that I bring to the students is the same message that I'd like to bring here, and that is that my father pretty much took an attitude that it doesn't affect him until it did affect him. And there was a famous German clergyman, Pastor Niemöller, who in fact was also arrested by the Germans, and he was ultimately sent to concentration camps but survived. And to paraphrase Niemöller, he said something to the effect that when the Germans came to power, when the Nazis came to power, and they came to arrest my neighbor because he was a communist, it didn't concern me, because I am not a communist. And when they came later to arrest my other neighbor because he was a socialist, it didn't concern me, because I'm not a socialist. When they came and arrested the Jew across the street from me, I'm not a Jew, so it was of no concern of me. When they finally came to arrest me, there was no one else left to speak up on my behalf. And I think that is the lesson that I'd like to convey. The people in Le Chambon did the right thing. And if they worried about whether or not it could affect them personally or their family, they put justice right before any other consideration. So I say to the young people today in the schools, if you see an injustice being committed, don't turn your back on it. Get involved. Speak up. Because if today they're ganging up on one of your classmates because of his color or the way he speaks or the color of his eyes or whatever the reason may be, just remember, if you allow it to happen, next week it may be your turn. And that, I think, is the important thing to remember. This is my father, Ernst Feigl, from a passport picture that was probably taken in 1937 or 38. And the picture was sent to me after the war by my aunt in Austria. This is my father, Ernst Feigl, in a photograph taken in the spring of 1942 in Auch, France, in the backyard of the house where we were living. This picture was taken as a passport picture in conjunction with his application for a visa to come to the United States. This is my mother, Agnes Feigl, in a picture taken also around 37 or 38 before the war, and the picture was given to me by my aunt in Austria after the war. My mother, Agnes Feigl, photograph taken as a passport photograph in conjunction with her application for immigration to the United States in the spring of 42. My father, my mother, and I, picture taken in the backyard of the house where we lived in Auch, France, in the spring of 1942. A picture of me, Peter Feigl, taken, I believe, at a scout function in the south of France, Marseille, in late 1942.